This is a good day. We got a lot of payment geeks and budding payment geeks here today. And I'm thrilled to be here and share some perspectives. I've only recently joined Bain, but I have been a payments strategy consultant for 25 years. And we were in the green room earlier, and Brody from JP Morgan said to me, he said, Erin, you've been doing payments since before payments were cool. And I wasn't sure what to make of that, but it is true, and payments are definitely cool today. And I'm really thrilled to have a couple of great panelists up here to share with you lessons from the trenches. They're going to share visceral stories, experiences that they've had that you can benefit from as you contemplate using tools like modern treasury to accelerate growth in your back office. So without any further ado, please welcome Nadia Asoyan and Stewart Ellis. Ready to tell some stories?
Absolutely.
Sure.
All right. So to lead off, we'll just acknowledge that when we think about bank payments, we've had a lot of introductory commentary today, but ACH, wires, and soon RTP, these are the lifeblood of how our economy functions, and equivalent systems, maybe less checks, but there are equivalent systems all around the world. And there is an extraordinary amount of value that gets moved, but as we've talked about, a lot of information and data that accompanies the payment that is really important as well. And knitting that all together in the back office and scaling payment operations is tough. And we've got some veterans here to share their experience with us. To lead off, I'm going to ask you each in turn similar questions. We'll bandy them about a bit. But I'd like to invite Stewart first to share some of your perspectives about how you've thought about addressing scaling operations at each of the companies that you've been with. And maybe lead off by giving our audience a sense of the narrative arc.
Sure.
And the number of different times you've done this.
Yeah, so hi everyone, it's nice to see you. I started my Silicon Valley career doing M&A at eBay and PayPal, and that's where I got my first exposure to payments. But after that, have been the first finance person hired at 4 separate venture-backed startups, 2 of which are now public, and the one that I'm currently CFO of, Hippo Insurance, is also public. And so I've seen a lot of this from the very, very beginning to not the end, because I don't think this really ever finishes. But there are a lot of sort of differences, I would say, between what you'd like to do in theory and what you need to do in practice. I'll probably screw the quote up, but I think it was Mike Tyson who said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And so you come in and you inherit whatever it was that was there before you. And I've heard a lot of things today about it's really important to bring the finance team and the engineering team together when you're trying to think about what you're building on the infrastructure side from a process standpoint and a tool standpoint. And the problem is it's economically rational not to hire a finance team until you know you have a product. And so a lot of these choices get made before someone like me ever shows up. And then I walk in and I think, okay, now I have to figure out what to do with this. And so, when you think about building versus buying your own stuff, like those decisions are made usually before I show up. But you end up first trying to think, what do I need to be world class at? Is it part of my core business? And in that case, the world would say you should probably build your own. And if it's an enabler to your business, like most of the time payments are, then you should try to buy something. But oftentimes what you need isn't available. And so you end up building despite the fact that you know that you should really be buying it. And things are evolving so quickly that that it's often a decision you have to revisit over and over and over again. And so it's my experience has been a lot of what I'd like to do, I end up having to compromise on, and then you just try to do your best every day to learn from those choices and evolve with the market. And when we started Hippo, or I wasn't there when the company was started, but when Hippo was started, Modern Treasury didn't exist. And we're now kind of revisiting things, and it probably makes sense to have a conversation about whether the tool is right for our infrastructure at this point.
Do you want to share some introductory comments before we delve into any
Yeah.
details?
Absolutely. And yeah, quick background on myself. Hi, everyone. So very similar story where I started early at Square, but was not part of initial build out on the finance team. So definitely learned a lot from the experience there, where a couple of years before IPO, we realized it's going to be a challenge because we have not invested upfront on building appropriate processes to build great infrastructure as it comes to finance side, passing audits, tracking all the transactions. And definitely was very traumatizing experience for finance team, pulling a lot of all-nighters, working with engineering and product team to get that to the finish line so we can actually file for IPO. And was very lucky to get that experience, and was lucky to be first finance hire at Robinhood, and brought my experience and trauma from previous days to actually, as soon as I started at Robinhood, started investing time in interacting with engineering and product team, but also they really valued my previous experience coming to me with a lot of questions on what should be done and what should be built in order for us to never actually experience delays and maybe some just various issues on being audited and potentially not being able to go public. Everyone, as soon as I joined, even though we were a 40 people company back then, or 50-ish, everyone thought like, okay, a few years from now, we're totally going IPO, so please tell us everything we need to build, so we actually do it. And yeah, got an advantage of being able to work and actually advocate for finance team. And currently I'm at Strike, which is a leading Bitcoin payments company, and definitely coming as a CFO with experience from both sides when you're coming to existing infrastructure and trying to fix it versus like when you got things done from a finance side right away. Definitely been experiencing a lot of appreciation from product and engineering and willingness to help, but definitely will say it's always a balance, it's always a trade-off. To what Stewart mentioned, it's not that finance comes first, product has to be first, and you have to find this balance between the two functions to make sure at the end of the day we succeed overall. But yeah, that's a little bit on my background, and happy to touch base in more details.
I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on your experience and perhaps not revisit all of the trauma, but highlight a couple of formative experiences, either at your most recent company or one along the way, and as a means to sort of share tactically with our audience, whether it's sort of cooperation, cross-functionally, integrating with banks or introducing these sort of new products and sort of that sort of things not going as you expect, or scaling exception management. Just what are a couple of examples that you can share?
I can talk a little bit about like what I walked into
Sure.
when I joined Hippo, and I think that it's important to understand that the way Hippo has innovated in the insurance space, and we do homeowners insurance, for those of you who don't know, is really not so much on the payments side or the infrastructure side that relates to reconciliation or billing or anything like that. Like we're offering customers a different kind of experience as a homeowner. And traditionally, the way insurance has worked, you buy a policy, which is essentially a right to file a claim if something goes wrong. And it's very complicated. You need to be a lawyer to understand, what you're buying, and sometimes you need a lawyer to get paid because the relationship itself traditionally has been set up as an adversarial one between you and your insurance carrier, and it's a zero-sum game. And so Hippo's, addition to what we're trying to do to change that customer experience is to make it really easy to buy, but also to change that adversarial dynamic and to sit on the same side of the table as our customer. And the belief is if we can define ourselves not as a home insurance company, but as a home protection company, and partner with our customers to reduce the risk of loss in their homes, then we'll increase the size of the pie for everyone. And we'll know more about the house and what it was like when we became the insurance company, so that we won't have to fight with them at the time that there is a loss. And we can approach that situation with more empathy and with a lot more kind of proactive customer focus, right? That's the theory. But that doesn't absolve us of responsibility for executing on the basic operational infrastructure aspects of insurance. And that's why payments and this sort of infrastructure is so strategic to us, because it's not something that we can win at our ultimate customer goal at, but we can absolutely lose. And when I joined, we had 3 operating bank partners. We had payments from customers coming in to one. We had payments that were going out to carrier partners that we worked with and reinsurers that we worked with coming out from a different bank. We had a third bank that we were using as the place where we parked money as it was coming back down from reinsurers before it went out to customers in order to pay claims. We had our own homegrown policy management system and billing systems, because nothing that was on the market at the time was both designed for us and also cheap enough for us to afford. And where do you start, right? I can't figure out. And we had no accounting team. We were working with a third-party accounting firm, and so the first thing we had to do was really understand all of the business processes and start to simplify the infrastructure that came before, so that we could make sense of all of this, and then start to partner with the technology teams to design infrastructure that allows us to start to reconcile and to know where the cash is. And if we screw that up, there's a chance we're on risk for something that we didn't intend to be on risk for, right? If we don't tell the reinsurer that they're reinsuring a specific policy, then something goes wrong, it's on us. And that, for a small technology-oriented startup, that's not really an acceptable outcome. And so I think the lesson has been, you have to understand the business process. You've got to help the technology team understand the business process, right? Because it's not always clear. I mean, I think our secret sauce as Hippo is joining together a world-class technology team with world-class insurance professionals. But bringing these 2 teams together 8 years ago, nobody really understood the language that each other spoke, right? It was really, really hard for the tech team to understand the regulatory requirements, the business requirements, the payment requirements. And they did think of it as a back office function. But a lot of conversations later and a lot of internal education later, I think they've started to see it a lot more like a strategic part of the business. And that's made a huge difference culturally. It's made a huge difference for me and my team, because I think they view us as partners in this. And that's, I think, what will ultimately make the difference between us being successful long term and us getting run over and by something we didn't see coming.
Yeah, so I think a couple of stories here to be added. So my background is mainly fintech, so last decade spent in that space, and all the companies I've been at, even though in a private setting, they were still highly regulated and still are. So you have to either maintain your money transmitter licenses, get audits done on public company deadlines. And at Robinhood, it was a broker-dealer where it's also a private company that operates as public. So what that means for finance team is a lot of focus on making sure that everything that just went live a couple of weeks ago, a few months ago, and that was maybe still in a startup mode, right, has to be actually reviewed by auditors and have to have processes in place. So you really got to invest upfront your time and effort on communicating audit requirements, making sure that you build the right process on reconciliation side to be able to not only to show a beauty of the product and how efficient it is, but being able also to be accountable at the end of the day for what's built. And we're not talking only just about audits, but about customer funds, right? About, in the case of Square, merchant funds, right? You don't want to be in the situation where something is missing when it comes to fintech. And it's truly something that consumers and customers would care about the most. So it's one, I would say, bucket where tools like Modern Treasury are so critical to help to utilize and build automation in the process. But also from my side, I would say where a lot of focus in the early days is spent is aligning and deep diving in the process, making sure that we don't have any gaps to eventually be successful. I will say specifically to Strike, where I am today, which is considered to be in the crypto space. It's been especially very interesting in the light of the last 12 months with FTX and multiple banks failing in a given week. And we experienced few of the banks that we have planned to use or been using all go down one by one. So, and definitely a lot of focus is spent on understanding how infrastructure works and how quickly can you move to continue maintaining the business on all parts of operations, both on the product but also on the finance. And when you losing significant partnerships like that, and you got your processes built around them and polish them with auditors, with regulators, it's definitely something that you have to make sure that you can transition in a very fast pace. And that's kind of where a lot of focus for finance team and operations team at Strike has been for the past few months, making sure that we understand deep dive, and if there are moving pieces in terms of partnerships, we investing in the core so we can always transition to any unknown changes in the future.
Let's hope we don't have as many as you've had recently.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Do you want to share a little bit with the audience here on tips or strategies for bringing together different constituents within your organization and building mutual understanding?
Happy to try. I mean, I think it's an ongoing challenge, right? Like everyone has a lot to do every day, and a lot of the challenges that I had on the infrastructure side were years ago, right? Like we've made a huge amount of progress since I joined, not because of me necessarily, but because we've been able to educate people within the organization around the reasons why these topics are important. And I think that's the helping the product team and the engineering team understand the implications of failures in these areas brings them into the process, right? And because nobody wants the company to experience either a bad customer experience or some adverse financial outcome, right? Everyone fundamentally is like aiming for the same goal. And so it's really about trying to help the organization understand how their job and their product or their piece of infrastructure or their team like fits into the broader picture. And that's an ongoing internal communications challenge. It's an ongoing educational challenge. And you have a lot more time to do that sort of thing when you have systems that can do all of the reconciliation in an automated way. And,
when you're not ticking and time.
Right, and so when you're young and scrappy as a company, a lot of times the answer is let's just throw people at the problem. And we talk a lot about building for scale and trying to figure out, well, it's not that hard to figure out that throwing people at a problem is not a very scalable solution. But you can have a different problem, I think, if you aren't thoughtful about your infrastructure and think about it strategically, which is you can have a lot of really scalable solutions, but still have a management problem because you have a lot of really narrow things that all have to talk to each other, and getting that data integration done right is not an easy thing to do. And so especially if the business needs or the market or other factors that influence either the data you want to collect or how you're going to use it, if those are all changing, right?
Yeah.
The most important thing is to have technology leaders and finance leaders that have a strong partnership. That hasn't always been the case at every company that I've worked with, but I think it is the case at Hippo, and I actually think it's one of the things that gives us a better chance at ultimately winning. Because what we're doing, and I think what most companies are trying to do, is to create that win-win situation where you can be a value-added partner to your technology and product team, and they can have enough of an understanding of your experience dealing with the problems, right? Like, I don't think, unfortunately, unlike in some industries, financial services in particular, and regulated financial services businesses are not the kind of places where you can just have mistakes that you can go back and correct, right?
No.
There's a much higher bar in our business, and I think that there's always an education process when someone new joins the team to help them understand that. But it's, again, I don't think you do it and move on. I think it's part of, you build it into your culture in order to make that work.
And what has your experience been in bridging those gaps? And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely a constant work in progress, but I will say, never thought I will say that it's been helpful to be in heavily regulated fintech space.
do tell more.
As a finance team, because you can always definitely use that as one of the most critical points as it comes to collaboration and prioritization on the product and engineering side, making sure that you advocate for actually staying in business, meeting the regulatory deadlines and audits, not that it has to be their only focus or their biggest focus, but it's definitely one of the critical points that you use as it comes to prioritization and communication with product engineering. And I would say another really important point, and that's more through really, truly experience, it comes with leadership and understanding on the leadership team side, how important it is to invest upfront. I definitely can say that I learned that myself, and I've seen finance leaders maybe not always investing upfront, right? And making other priorities more critical. And again, it's always a dance and it's always a balance, how you have all of this in one place, and resources are limited in startups for sure, and you need to make sure that you build amazing products, but you also need to follow the deadlines as it comes to regulators and auditors. So I would say, as long as the leadership team is also aware and finance leaders are advocating for the team, and I can definitely say that I spend time with engineering and product on making sure that they always keep in mind how the work that is done on the product side and just new upcoming launches will impact our future audits and our processes. And we always try to collaborate, but you definitely need to invest in that and continue focusing. I would say it would never be a priority, and it shouldn't be for product team, but finance team should be a stakeholder, reminding and making sure they get a stake at the table where they get to be considered as it comes to overall process.
Yeah. How do you think about build by partner in your financial investment? Like when you're looking at your infrastructure for moving money, how do you weigh, what is your framework for thinking that through? And perhaps how has it changed over time, or sharing different circumstances, different companies you've been with, and the types of, the rationale for some of the decisions that were made along the way?
I would say it's an evolving process for sure, through experience with the whole industry, just payments industry changing. Definitely for fintechs, it's a very heavy infrastructure. You have many internal systems, right? You have ledgers, you have external systems that you also need to build integrations with to make sure that you have good visibility into understanding how things reconcile. I will say it's definitely evolving with some new technology coming, and do not want to give like a special kudos to Modern Treasury, but it is kind of one of the most amazing tools on the market that helps engineering and finance team to speed up the processes when it comes to banking integrations, for example. But I will say that from starting 12 years ago in this space, definitely see more automation appearing, but I would not say that it's as simple as you may imagine. It's definitely a lot of heavy load on reconciliation and understanding of money movements. But there are definitely, there is a lot of focus on improving the process. And I would say one thing definitely, maybe it's my personal experience, but a lot of focus on helping finance team to get processes done easily, right? So I used to see lack of reconciliation in big, huge companies, public, with tens of hundreds of millions of dollars of balances being unreconciled, right? And still being public and be okay with that. And definitely there has been more focus done on helping finance team to get better understanding of balances, money movements. And there is a tooling that helps to bridge the balance between product engineering and finance team.
And I'll just add, I think the last two companies I've worked for have been on totally opposite ends of the spectrum. Dimitri used the example of the people living paycheck to paycheck. My last company's mission was to try to help them get real-time access to their earnings. And so money movement was at the core of the product, right? It was never a question, are we going to build something or are we going to buy something? Like that was the IP, or is a core part of the IP. At Hippo, we've had to take a much different approach. And as I alluded to earlier, it was really about trying to understand which pieces of our infrastructure, which pieces of our customer experience were the places where we needed to be world-class, where we needed to differentiate ourselves, and which pieces are the pieces that just need to be good enough. And good enough still needs to be great, right? But it's not something that we're not gonna differentiate on billing. Again, we can screw it up, but great billing just is one of those things you're not gonna, anyway, you know what I mean. But then you have to look around and see what's out there, and are there third-party solutions that meet your needs? And the answer is very different today than it was 8 years ago. And so I think
it's encouraging.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
people are catching up, which is great.
Yes. And the back office is all of a sudden pretty cool. Thank you very much for your perspectives. I know our audience really appreciates them, and we're much better informed on how to avoid the trauma in the trenches.
Absolutely.
Thank you.